Good morning, my wonderful APE students. Today we are going to explore topics 9.9 and 9.10. And those topics explore the enduring understanding of the health of a species is tied to its ecosystem, and minor environmental changes can have a large impact, even small ones. Okay. So we're going to first talk specifically about kind of what the primary human causes of biodiversity loss are. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but it does kind of end in the order of how big of an impact it's currently having. How big of an impact it's had kind of in the past and leading up to now. But does not necessarily mean that this is how impacts will go in the future. But for now, we're going to use this little acronym, HIPCO, right? And each letter stands for one of those causes we just talked about. So as of right now, and this is far and away the biggest cause, is simply the loss or fragmentation of habitats. Now that can be for a variety of reasons, just simple human development, clearing of forest or grasslands for agriculture, especially things like cattle grazing. It could be clear cutting for logging. Any one of those things falls into this category. And the primary reason we're seeing species decline worldwide is because of some variety of habitat loss or habitat fragmentation. All right. Next, as we've already sort of chatted about, are invasive species. So the bringing of one species from one part of the world to another part of the world where it would not have migrated naturally. We've already kind of talked about in class what qualifies a species as invasive. That's probably the second most common. And a lot of our invasive species are plants because they can come in and often don't have natural predators. They can sort of take over, alter the balance of an ecosystem, and thereby contribute to habitat loss or major habitat changes that a lot of species can't cope with. Simple population growth. So as we've talked about also this year, there is finite supply of food, space, resources. As human population continues to grow, as a result, we just simply require a larger proportion of the Earth's space, resources, etc., leaving less for other organisms, simply through population growth. Pollution. Primarily, I would say aquatic pollution, so pollution of water, but air pollution certainly has taken its toll as well. But we put certain chemicals into the air and into the water, and that can, again, alter those systems, as some species have a little more trouble coping with the presence of those pollution, right? Remember this term, indicator species. Such as some of those macroinvertebrates we collected from the stream, those group 1. Those are sort of the first ones to show signs that there is something wrong in the habitat, often in the form of pollution. They're not very tolerant. Okay, climate change. Now, I mentioned as I first started talking that we're talking, these are sort of the order of impacts in the past leading up to now. Climate change is having a larger and larger impact as we speak. As a matter of fact, it may have even climbed the list a little bit. But it is safe to say at this point that climate change will become a larger and larger impact over the course of time. But again, with climate change, we are basically making it impossible for some habitats to even exist potentially. We're causing some habitats to shift in latitude farther north or farther south to better match the climate and temperatures that they're used to. We're warming ocean waters, having some kind of major impacts on coral reefs through climate change. So all of these things come into play. And then last, and this is really specific to kind of our large mammals and some of our fish. species that we rely on for food, but our large mammals like elephants, tigers, rhinos, etc. So the overexploitation just simply means we have come close to, in some cases, hunting them into extinction. Whales, of course. And so through because maybe they have extremely valuable body parts. So in some cases, Chinese medicine relies on like parts of tiger for some of their ancient remedies. Or ivory tusks in the case of elephants are super valuable. Ivory is a black market kind of traded thing, very, very valuable. So this overexploitation caused by kind of economic drivers sometimes leads to hunting some species to near extinction. And in the case of overfishing in the oceans, that's simply we're relying so much on them for food. We're harvesting them at a rate faster than they can repopulate and not a sustainable use. Okay, so that HIPCO acronym right here is something you definitely want to remember. All right, so let's talk about some common characteristics of endangered species. And we've already chatted a lot about what specialist species are. You're going to notice a lot of these characteristics match those of specialist species. But typically, they're going to have a small or localized range, which means they only live in specific or smallish habitats. So there's a term we've not brought up yet, endemic. Endemic just simply means that it's only found in that kind of one location. So if a species is endemic to a relatively small area, and that is its only range, obviously it's not going to support a very large population. Any sort of damage to that small habitat is going to cause that species to decline, potentially go extinct. Now, we could talk about things like tigers that require a very large territory to survive. So a single tiger being way up on that food chain, one tiger needs a very large amount of habitat to support it. As we go through those trophic levels, entropy, the 10% rule helps to explain that. And so as human populations grow and we encroach on these habitats, tigers simply just might not have enough space to support very large populations. We talked about island biogeography already, but if they are endemic to islands, that means that it's very difficult to migrate to new habitats, or they might be highly specialized to that island. And when some damage happens to that island, which could be natural or human caused, those species have a hard time recovering. Low reproductive rates. So next unit 3, we will chat about R and K selected species in a little more detail. But with low reproductive rates, we're talking about things like elephants and whales, which rather than having like lots of offspring and reproducing maybe multiple times a year or every single year, they have just 1 or 2 offspring at a time with several years in between. And humans actually fit in this low reproductive rate category. We just happen to have high reproductive success because most of our young survive. Okay, the low reproductive rates makes it very difficult for a population to recover, even if we've stopped the action that has caused their decline in the first place. Specialized breeding habits. So this is especially pertinent to us here in the Pacific Northwest. Salmon don't have a smaller localized range. They've got the entire ocean at their disposal. They don't have low reproductive rates, as I mentioned. What they do have is specialized breeding habits. So while they spend much of their life out in the ocean, they do return to the location of their birth to breed. And so in the case of hydroelectric dams, we have these giant concrete structures that make that migration for salmon up to their breeding grounds very difficult. So the success of those salmon navigating our river systems has declined. And therefore, even though they are not necessarily a specialized species, they have this very specialized breeding habit that makes it difficult for reproduction to occur. Specialized diet, we've chatted about those already, but koalas, pandas that really only eat a very specific thing that's always found in specific parts of the world. And then, of course, having a small population size from the beginning doesn't leave much room for recovery. All right, so what can we do? All right. So one of the things, so just to deal simply with that overhunting or overexploitation, is just to criminalize poaching and international trade. Now, it wouldn't be enough to say, we don't want to say ban it, right? We need to have legal teeth. So what we're not going to say is ban hunting or ban international trade. We're going to criminalize it, and then we're going to give specific consequences. So it's not enough. This is a big hint here to just say ban. We're going to criminalize by legislation. So here in the U.S., we have what is called the Endangered Species Act. Okay. And basically, the Endangered Species Act has legal teeth to it. So it prohibits importing, exporting, taking, possessing, selling, and transporting endangered and threatened species. This is in the United States, by the way. USA. Okay, this is one of the pieces of legislation you guys need to know. So I'm going to put an extra star by this one, as is the next piece of legislation. So don't gloss over this part. You need to know what we're talking about when we say the Endangered Species Act. Okay, so this is the USA, first enacted in the early 1970s. Okay, and it puts legal teeth behind any sort of importing, exporting, taking, possessing, selling, and transporting endangered and threatened species. Now, there are certain exceptions. Also, it designates critical habitats. So again, with habitat loss being our number one cause of biodiversity loss, the Endangered Species Act designates critical habitats and prohibits destruction of that habitat. So how does the Endangered Species Act go about doing this? Well, it is actually enforced through the use of citizen suits, so imprisonment, fines, and forfeiture of property. So again, it's not enough to say ban overhunting or ban certain acts. We have to have enacted some sort of legislation to make it illegal or criminal, so that then we can enforce in much the way we do our other laws, lawsuits, prison time, fines, and forfeiture of property. Okay, now moving on, we have an international agreement. Often referred to as CITES. That is an acronym which stands for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. Now, both of these are discussed in a little more detail on page 252 of your textbook, right? So this international agreement its aim is to ensure that international trade in specimens of wild animals and plants does not threaten the survival of the species. So basically, any sort of international crossing or customs, there is some measures taken to kind of help to prevent the bringing or transporting of endangered species from maybe its native habitat to a different part of the world. Obviously, exceptions for like zoos and aquariums and stuff like that, whose purpose is to conserve species. But you and I can't necessarily just buy a tiger that's endangered and have it brought to Walla Walla, for example. There's all kinds of laws in and around that. It also helps to prevent the movement of things like ivory or the parts of animals that are super valuable that have been illegally poached. Okay, so again, you guys need to know these two pieces of legislation, the Endangered Species Act and CITES. Okay, so make sure you guys get this written down and also follow up with the textbook reading. All right. Excuse me. Other things we could do is we can protect habitats. So here in the U.S. and all over the world, we have nature preserves, national parks, and wildlife refuges that has certain legal protections against development. Sort of depends on what type of nature preserve we're talking about. But they are set aside simply so that habitats are left intact for our birds, our mammals, and so on in all parts of the U.S. They try to have nature preserves and national parks that meet like every major ecosystem type. And it's pretty cool. And there's also all kinds of cultural ecosystem services that come up across these. Most of us have visited at least one national park or wildlife refuge just to enjoy nature. All right. Last but not least are what we call habitat and wildlife corridors. So we talked about this habitat fragmentation piece. So we can lose a habitat entirely, but more often we're talking about the fragmenting of habitats and sort of creating little islands of habitat. Now, if you go back to our theory of island biogeography, you'll remember that small islands and isolated islands have a hard time maintaining biodiversity. Well, we could sort of cause that same sort of impact with habitats if we cut like a little area of forest off from the surrounding forest. We've created a little island of habitat, which is more prone to biodiversity loss. Some species have a difficult time migrating across these clear-cut areas. So habitat and wildlife corridors help to minimize the effect of habitat fragmentation by providing pathways that organisms can navigate. Now, in the case of clear-cutting, you'll see that there are these corridors of trees left intact, which sort of connect the different parts of the forest that would have been fragmented by a clear cut. So those species that don't navigate through these clear cut areas very well, right, still have pathways to migrate to different parts of the forest, etc. So much logging, the National United States Forest Service requires these little habitat corridors to be left intact much of the time when we go and log our national forests. Okay. Now, you guys may have also seen as you cross Snoqualmie Pass and other passes going through the Cascades are these wildlife crossings. So when we have fragmentation caused by like major interstates, like I-90 in this case, that is a fragmentation of habitat. It makes it very difficult and unsafe for species to cross that big barrier into other parts of their forest habitat. So in many places, they've begun installing these kind of wildlife crossings and corridors so that they can safely navigate past or through that highway in this case. Okay, these have been shown to be effective to help with migration and kind of minimize habitat fragmentation caused by human development. That is it for today. Adios.